Well, it's 5 o'clock somewhere, and that must mean it's time for another Food for Thought Friday. Do what you want, and above else, seek happiness. Seems like perhaps it's reasonable advice. After all, who would know more what makes me happy more than I do? In fact, happiness is such an important aspect of life that it's written into the American Declaration of Independence as an unalienable right. The right to pursue happiness. But is this pursuit of happiness all that it's cracked up to be? Well, perhaps it depends entirely on how we go about that pursuit. Let's be clear, I'm not referring to a moral versus immoral route to pursue happiness. I think most people would agree that immoral pursuits of happiness should be avoided. Happiness as an end state probably isn't justified if we use immoral, illegal, or unethical means to obtain that end. Somebody with high levels of trait psychopathy who uses dubious means to achieve the end goal of personal happiness would likely not be seen as a virtuous pursuer of the unalienable right. Okay? So clearly there needs to be some parameters around this pursuit. So here's the question. Is a state of happiness more readily achievable by seeking out our own self-interest? Stop and think about that for a moment. We live in what some call a post-truth era. There's no longer a sense of absolute, objective truth. There's merely a multitude of self-truths. I have my truth, you have your truth. I speak my truth, you live and own your truth. We see a current cancel culture, which has been defined by some as speaking truth to power. In 1882, the German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche wrote, quote, "God remains dead, and we have killed him. Is not the greatness of this deed too great for us? Must we not ourselves become gods, simply to be worthy of it?" Now, this is a fascinating prediction made by Nietzsche because 142 years later, is this not exactly a reflection of our current society? Have we not become gods in our own minds? The singular, sole author of truth? There's nothing greater in our own minds than our own subjective realities? That is something to ponder, to be sure. Now, the section that I just quoted is taken from a poem called Parable of the Madman by Friedrich Nietzsche, and it's short. And so I'm actually going to read it to you here to give you some context. The Parable of the Madman. And it goes, "Have you not heard of that madman who lit a lantern in the bright morning hours, ran to the marketplace and cried incessantly, 'I seek God, I seek God!' As many of those who did not believe in God were standing around just then. He provoked much laughter. 'Has he got lost?' asked one. 'Did he lose his way like a child?' asked another. 'Or is he hiding? Is he afraid of us? Has he gone on a voyage, emigrated?' And thus they yelled and laughed. The madman jumped into their midst and pierced them with his eyes. 'Whither is God?' he cried. 'I will tell you. We have killed him. You and I, all of us, are his murderers. But how did we do this? How could we drink up the sea? Who gave us the sponge to wipe away the entire horizon? What were we doing when we unchained this earth from its sun? Whither is it moving now? Whither are we moving? Away from all suns? Are we not plunging continually? Backward, forward, sideways, in all directions? Is there still any up or down? Are we not straying as though through an infinite nothing? Do we not feel the breath of empty space? Has it not become colder? Is not night continually closing in on us? Do we not need to light our lanterns in the morning? Do we hear nothing as yet of the noise of the gravediggers who are burying God? Do we smell nothing as yet of the divine decomposition? Gods, too, decompose. God is dead. God remains dead. And we have killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves? The murderers of all murderers. What was holiest and mightiest of all that the world has yet owned has bled to death under our knives. Who shall wipe this blood off of us? What water is there for us to clean ourselves? What festivals of atonement? What sacred games shall we have to invent? Is not the greatness of this deed too much for us? Must we ourselves become gods simply to appear worthy of it? There has never been a greater deed, and whoever is born after us for the sake of this deed, he will belong to a higher history than all history hitherto. Here the madman fell silent and looked again at his listeners, and they too were silent and stared at him in astonishment. And at last he threw his lantern on the ground and broke it into pieces and went out. I have come too early, he said then. My time is not yet. This tremendous event is still on its way, still wandering. It has not yet reached the ears of men. Lightning and thunder require time. The light of the stars requires time. Deeds, though done, still require time to be seen and heard. This deed is still more distant from them than most distant stars, and yet they have done it themselves. It has been related further that on the same day the madman forced his way into several churches, and there struck up his Requiem Aeternam Deo. Led out and called to account, he said always to have replied nothing but, what after all are these churches now, if they are not the tombs and the sepulchres of God? End quote. So the big question is this, and that was the parable of the madman. So the big question is this: given our propensity to view ourselves as the author of absolute truth, what is the best way to pursue happiness? Well, if you don't know by now, I've got a passion for bridging the gap between scientific, scholarly research and real-world practical application, and this week I'm reading an article called Awe and Humility by authors Jennifer E. Steller from the University of Toronto, Paul K. Piff from the University of California, Irvine, Amy Gordon and Craig L. Anderson from the University of California, San Francisco, Galen D. McNeil from the University of California, Los Angeles, and Dacre Keltner from the University of California, Berkeley. This article was published in the Journal of Personality and Social Psychology in 2018, and I'm going to show a screenshot of it somewhere on the screen, as I always do. As we dive into this article, let's acknowledge the important claim right off the top that the authors make. Opening quote: "The emerging literature on humility has revealed its important interpersonal benefits, including healthier social relationships and increased altruism, as well as its personal benefits, including greater well-being and resilience." Closing quote. Alright, huge claim here made by the authors. Well-being and resilience result from humility. Now that sounds very different than what mainstream society is pushing. So let's look at a few quick definitions outlined by the authors. Number one, humility is defined as, quote, holding realistic, secure, and open view of the self. as well as an appreciation of the value and the contribution of others. It's considered a foundational virtue because it counters selfish and socially disruptive inclinations such as entitlement, arrogance, and narcissism, closing quote. So humility, being humble, it doesn't mean thinking less of ourselves, it means being realistic about our strengths and our limitations, acknowledging that we are not the be-all and the end-all. In this regard, the author's right. Opening quote. A more realistic, secure, and open view of self includes restraint in endorsing extreme positive illusions about one's strengths and acknowledgement of one's limitations and weaknesses, although this does not equate low self-esteem, closing quote. So if happiness flows from humility, we might want to ask then, how do we generate greater humility? Again, this doesn't mean thinking less of ourselves, it doesn't mean thinking lowly of ourselves. Okay? Now, thankfully, the research has addressed this question as well. And the answer is awe. The authors define awe as, quote, the feeling of wonder and amazement at being in the presence of something vast that transcends one's current understanding, closing quote. In other words, a sense of awe is generated when we're in the presence of something vastly greater than ourselves, implying we first need to come to terms that there is something greater than ourselves, which can be, opening quote, beautiful, expansive vistas, other people who display virtuosity, magnanimity, that's a tough word to say, magnanimity, or stature, art, music, or religious experiences and ideas, closing quote. All right, so first we need to come to terms that there's something greater than ourselves, than our own sense of authorship, something more significant than ourselves. That's the first thing. Then we need to come to terms with the vastness of that thing, of such an experience, and it has to be to the point where it persuades or it supersedes our current understanding of the world. So we need to be in the presence of something so vast, but so vast that it supersedes our current understanding of the world. An example of this might be a religious experience. It might be a great piece of music, a great piece of visual art, a painting, a dance, something that elicits a sense of awe. But then we also need to be challenged by it, and challenged to the point that it requires us to change our mental framework of the world. And this means that we must wrestle with it and come to terms with the idea that we first perceived we have to come to terms with the idea that what we first perceived to be true or truth or our truth is in fact incomplete or wrong. The vastness of the experience must demand accommodation. The author's right. Opening quote. By the way, I should state, these authors, as far as I know, are not of any specific religious bent or bias, okay? And this is what they're saying the science is leading us to. So the author's right. Quote, two appraisals are central to awe. Number one, perceptions of vastness, which can refer to an entity's physical size or number, ability, prestige, power, or complexity. And number two, the need for accommodation, which is the process by which a person revises his or her mental schemas or creates a new one to account for the deviation between the stimuli and one's current understanding of the world. Now, the really cool thing about this paper is that the authors didn't just write a philosophical or hypothetical paper on what they conceptualized to maybe lead to happiness and humility. They devised 5 distinct experimental studies, and they measured changes in humility reported by self-report data as well as third-party reported data on the test participants regarding the test participant level of humility. Okay, so using the scientific method, the authors found that experiences of awe reliably predicted and resulted in greater increased humility, which was previously shown to lead to greater well-being and happiness. So let me ask this again. Is the pursuit of happiness all it's cracked up to be? And perhaps it depends entirely on how we go about that pursuit. So rather than seeking happiness for happiness' sake, let me encourage and challenge you, and me. Let's get out there and seek out moments of awe. Moments that force us to face the vastness of the world around us, to wrestle with and to come to terms with our place in the world, to challenge our schemas of what it means to be human, and to force us to accommodate something greater. Then, maybe, we might find that we, as a collective, have truly found happiness. I hope that helps. Follow me for more.